Well, hello again. This is Dr. Jimmy once more. This is Friday, the 2nd day of September, which means it's just 2 weeks to Halloween Horror Nights 26. Oh boy. Can't wait at all. More excited. Well, it also means that I hope all of you survived Hurricane Hermine last night. Those of you who were in Florida, where we got a little bit of weather, not so... What is that? Is that... Excuse me. Yeah, bad hair. That's why I wear a hat. There we go. Get it all. Alright, that's better. Which is one of the reasons, I should say, why I wear the thing in the first place. But getting back to it. Yes, we had a bit of weather last night here in central Florida. Not so much as it did up north, of course, where the thing actually struck more savagely, and at least one person's reported to have not survived. So I hope you've all survived Hermine. Hermine? You better believe Hermine. She was the meanest thing we've ever seen. Oh, silly. Anyway, getting back to it. Yes, if you haven't survived the hurricane and you're still watching this video, that can only mean one thing. There's internet in the afterlife, which it ties in oddly enough with what we're going to be talking about in a little bit. But first, showing off the t-shirt. This is a Universal Studios attraction shirt. It's got a bunch of attractions that aren't there anymore, really. Twister's gone. This is Disaster's gone. Jaws, oh, I miss Jaws so much. And Terminator's still there. Well, for now. Anyway, there's rumours. But getting back to Jaws, of course, this shirt was purchased shortly after the Jaws ride closed. It was the only thing left that had Jaws on it at the time, and I wanted to grab it while it was still available. So it's special for me, remembering old rides. Now, when I left off the previous video, part 13, this is part 14 of my history of Halloween Horror Nights 23, What Evil Has Taken Root. Yes, and left off my previous video, part 13, after I wrapped up La Llorona, but I realised after I'd made it, I left something out. I talked about urban legends a bit, and I suggested that the story of La Llorona, a Mexican folk tale, doesn't really fit an urban legend, and there's the question. Why do they call the house that? And I didn't answer that question. My theory, which may be completely wrong, but who knows, is that they planned, by calling it Urban Legends La Llorona, to start a whole new franchise of original houses based on various urban legends, you see. That makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? In fact, you might even suppose the Chupacabra house that they were meant to do the previous year, 2012, that ended up, not being done because the building got torn down before they could finish building the house inside it. That one might have been thought as an urban legend themed house in a way. Chupacabra is a sort of urban legend. So perhaps they do intend that, but since 2013 there's never been any other house with the prefix urban legends. No other house fits that. So they haven't returned to that theme yet. Who knows what the future may hold in store for us. Maybe in 2017, 2018, they'll return to urban legends again with their next urban legend house. Urban legends, the choking Doberman, or urban legends, the cactus with spiders in it. Well, probably not those, but something more scary. Maybe that hook guy, or the alligators in the sewers or something. Who knows? Mothman would be clever. Oh, the Jersey Devil, that might be a good one. Who knows what they might do in the future? Yeah. I don't know. I barely know what they're doing in the present. But let's go back to the past, shall we? Alright, another thing about it was, of course, as I was doing every one of these haunted houses, I made up a cocktail. And for La Llorona, I have here, it says, what I did, 4 urban legends La Llorona, this chilling cup of tears, tequila, that's appropriate, Mexican, right? Rumplemints and pineapple juice. So here was what I called my cocktail. It was served up in a tall glass. It looks like it had some salt on the rim and a bit of lime in there. But it's sort of like a margarita with a little added bit of a twist, with the rumplemints making it quite chilling. That was the whole idea, to make it a bit of a unexpected ingredient. It actually worked quite well. Sort of minty tequila and pineapple and lime. A bit of salt on the rim. So that was that cocktail. So let's get on with it. There was one remaining house, of course, the 8th house of Howling Horror Nights 23. The last house I've yet to mention in soundstage number 2. Afterlife, Death's Vengeance, which was a 3D house. Oh, 3D. But it wasn't a humorous 3D house. It's supposed to try to make 3D work in a more terrifying way. This house also evoked the mysterious little village of Cary, Ohio, yet again. The story was loosely based on real-life incident right here in Florida. Very loosely based. Back in the 1930s, there was an Italian man immigrated from Italy to the United States, Giuseppe Zangara, and he apparently had some sort of problem with the current president. It was sort of a social, I don't know if he was a socialist or something, but he had, you know, this whole anger at the rich and powerful and the downtrodden masses, and decided to strike back at the elites, and he was going to shoot the president. So he knew the president was going to be visiting Florida, where he lived. Well, actually, I think he lived somewhere else, but he went to Florida and met, and where FDR was going to go by in a motorcade or whatever, he was going to shoot him. He was a little man, little bitty man, so he got up on a chair, and because the lady sitting in front of him had a big hat and he couldn't see over it, and he shot and didn't hit the president. He killed, I think it was either the governor of Illinois or the mayor of Chicago. Whoever it was in the car with him. People in Illinois say he threw himself in front of the president to save him and took the bullet and lost his life. But the president was not shot, and Zangara was apprehended. And of course, because the person who did get hit with the bullet passed away, he was convicted of murder very quickly and was sentenced to the electric chair. Old Sparky, the electric chair here in Florida, and was electrocuted. And it's very famous is that he was a bit erratic when they did the trial. He said strange things at the trial, you know, and when he was going to be executed, he started shouting from the chair, push the button, but he had a thick Italian accent. Hey, push the button! You know, like Chico Marx or somebody. Push the button, push the button. And that was his last words when they fried him, pulled the switch, and that was the end of him. So this story isn't at all about the house, except the idea of someone in the electric chair, and the whole idea of this execution sort of was loosely inspired the house itself. The house itself takes place in Cary, Ohio, and it's not a political assassin, it's a serial killer, Bobby the Blade Galata. Galata is an Italian name, I suppose, but it sounds a bit like a Spanish word for cookie, which made me laugh. He did get baked after all. Easy bake oven, whatever you want to call it. So the idea is he had killed many people back in the 1930s, you see, and that's when the story takes place in the past. And he was sentenced to the electric chair, Old Smoky, the electric chair in Cary, Ohio's penitentiary, not to be confused with the one at Hellgate Prison, which is somewhere else, I guess. But he was put in, but also called Old Smoky, and so he was put in the chair and electrocuted for his crimes, you see. That's where the story begins, oddly enough, not where it ends. because what happens is we go into the afterworld, where all sorts of weird things. It's the moment of his death, and as his consciousness disappears into the afterworld, he is tormented by all the people he killed, and demons and creatures, until he is destroyed for his crimes in the next life. So it's the afterlife and death's vengeance on the serial killer Bobby the Blade Galata. Very creepy. Neat idea. Was it executed as neatly? Sometimes. Sometimes, when things were all perfect, and then the house would be quite wonderful, I thought. This house, they had a rather nifty facade where it had like newspapers of his crimes, and there was like a newspaper stand outside in an old vintage automobile, and a raven. Those were all over the place, crows, whatever they were, that year. And when you went into the house, put on your little glasses, so you can see in 3 dimensions. The first scene is the actual execution. He's being executed by an officer, pulls the switch. But above him, you see in the roof, somehow they had an illusion like there was another ethereal inversion of the same scene below, and that was sort of floating like in the spirit world. And then you go in through it and you find yourself into his consciousness at time of death, or whatever you want to think of it, what the afterlife. And so we see all sorts of weird surreal images. You see prisoners in their black and white stripes. They're all distorted, ones grotesquely tall, ones horrible, ghoulish, monstrous face. They seem to be leering and giggling and coming after you in a bright colours because of the 3D effects, and it's all surreal and strange. You go through this, again you see him sort of floating from being electrocuted, and then there's one scene where it's all newspaper clippings of the various murders, and the sort of spectral figures come out with skull-like faces of prisoners who have been killed, and then of course there are victims, murder victims. One of them has a big knife stuck in her, and because of the blood and the knife seems to be 3 feet closer to you than from where the person is. So it's like floating in your face. It's all quite shocking. And they have all sorts of things of this sort, of the various murder scenes and bodies and floating things. They threw in some of those electric demons that we've saw before in the in-between. They showed up again with the big bat wings and all of with more lightning bolts going through their costumes, like they made them more electrical looking or something. So if we had all of that sort of thing, and the giggling, laughing demons, and of course the vortex tunnel, but that was at the end. Before you got to the vortex tunnel, the last thing they did, and this was all part of the idea that you're going through the last bit of his consciousness. There was a scene where there was sort of a thing on the wall, like one of those heartbeat monitors, and apparently that told you that his life had actually ended at that point, his physical life. But when you go through, here he is looming in front of you, and suddenly from behind, an arm with a blade grips right through his chest. A woman behind him, one of his victims, has impaled him on his own blade, and so he's sort of been killed in the afterlife by one of his own victims. And then the vortex tunnel, when you go through that, it represents sort of how his soul is being ripped to pieces, and you see little bits and pieces of him spinning around and around in the vortex tunnel, the idea being that now he's being dissipated into nothingness, and even in the afterlife his consciousness is destroyed into oblivion. It's a bit complex. You might not have got it when you went through it. Just looks like all bright colours and weird things. May not have been as effective as they'd planned. If I hadn't had the idea explained to me, I wouldn't have enjoyed it quite as much. And sometimes the fellow with the person with the knife doesn't stick the arm through and you don't even know what's going on at that scene. It seemed to end suddenly and abruptly, and there should have been more to it. Then I went back through when they had the correct ending scene. Oh, that's what that was supposed to be. So I got it then. But it was probably one of the least satisfactory houses for me, although the idea behind it was rather clever, and a couple of times the walkthrough worked fairly well. And so, yeah, I don't give it an F. I give it maybe a C minus, but I still liked it nevertheless. I mean, this house has to suck for me to hate it, you know, like Disorientorium or Blood Ruins or Fear Factor. Those were awful houses. Oh, but anyway, that was the house that year. And of course, after that, again, scanning your card for Legendary Truth at the end of it. So I had a cocktail for that house as well. That didn't take too long to get through. Let's see, where is it? Here it is. For Afterlife's Death Vengeance, the shocking concoction of Crown Royal, Patron Cafe, Kahlua, and Monster energy drink. So that would have had some coffee, I guess, for give you the jitters, and that was the idea, to have a drink that would sort of be jittery. Here it is in a tall glass, as you can see. That was the Afterlife Death Vengeance cocktail. That was the last of the house cocktails I created for Halloween Horror Nights 23. So I'm all done with all of the haunted houses. So let's move on to the streets, shall we? Can I even remember what the hell the streets were? Fortunately, I have a guide map handy, so I can get an idea and remember what the streets were that year. Oh, that's right, that was the year all the streets were. They're no scare zone, it was the undead streets, the Walking Dead. Yes, that year they gave the whole damn streets over to the Walking Dead. Walking Dead everywhere in the streets. Not popular with the hardcore fan base, but the general public loved it. So all the way through you hear that Walking Dead theme from the television program. That sort of da-da-da-da-da-da. I can't remember how it goes, but that music from the opening, it was everywhere. And so you got kind of tired of the Walking Dead songs by the time they were done. It seemed to me that there was no real scare zone in the front of the park. Sort of. There were zombies there at times. I'll get to that later. But the areas that were designated as scare zones, sort of, different areas of Walking Dead. In New York Street, they have what they call the Fall of Atlanta, representing basically the first season of The Walking Dead, and which had the whole bit with Atlanta. Allow me to pause for a moment. I'll be right back. Visual aids. Yeah. So, you know, when he wakes up, hello, when he wakes up in hospital, little Rick goes out into Atlanta and he dresses up in his uniform all pretty, just like this, and he's in Atlanta and he comes across a great big tank, and if you remember, there's a zombie there, like this, yes, and this fellow he meets out there by the tank. Hello, my name is Glenn. I'm Korean. And they all meet up, Mr. Ree and Sheriff Grimes, and helps them to escape from the tank and kill the zombie. Okay, that's silly, but I have to have fun with my Funko Pops. All right, so that was that's what was going on in the in that area. You had that recreated sort of. They had the great big bloody tank right there, what they call. What's it called? Gramercy Park, the park in New York area. Great big tank and zombies running amok, and they didn't have Rick or Glenn. They didn't have any of the characters, the main characters of The Walking Dead. Apparently, just like the previous year, the contract with AMC meant they could show zombies, and the only characters from the show they could have were those characters that got bitten and then turned to zombies. For example, we have Penny, who was already a zombie, and Merle, when he became a zombie. You got to see Merle Dixon this year. You didn't see him the year before. You got to see Merle in the haunted house, the one I talked about earlier, the No Safe Haven. He was in the house because, of course, Merle had become a zombie by that point. You didn't see the governor, you didn't see the other characters that were humans. So obviously you didn't have any of those characters in the streets, although there might be little things that are little shout-outs, Easter eggs to the characters. So you have the tank where all that happened, but you don't have Rick or Glenn or any of those people, just a whole bunch of zombies. But you also have generic human survivors, people dressed like Atlanta businessmen or citizens running through the streets being chased by the zombies, coming after you. The zombies in this area moving a little bit faster, a little bit more alive, and later on the zombies are slower, as you note through the series. As they decompose more, they become more dead, so they're not as lively as the zombies that have only freshly been killed. That's something that they tried to incorporate, but they had a nifty little shtick going on. And in this area, there was a guy climbs onto the tank. He's being chased by zombies. They overcome him and they bite him. Oh, isn't that terrible? But then later on, he's lying there. He gets up. Now he's a zombie too. He transforms in front of your eyes from a human to a zombie after getting bit. And then he lurches out after people himself. It was a neat little bit of show business. They did that quite well. And I should also point out, in the opening weekend at least, that area reeked of rotting flesh. They had the stinky things in the streets. They released the odor, and so it created this horrible death smell in that area. But in later weeks they took that out, apparently. At least I could, maybe we just all went nose blind, I don't know, but like in those commercials. But I think the smell was getting into the park in daylight hours. They didn't want that, and so they removed that. But at least in the opening weekend, you had this really nasty smell in that area. Well, that's the fall of Atlanta, and I would like to go into more of the streets, but I'm getting past my time limit. So I will continue with the other undead streets of Halloween Horror Nights 23 in part 15 when I get to it. Yeah.